All right, let's make a formal introduction for our listeners. Good morning, Peter. My name is
Morning.
Claudio, and I'm calling you from Washington, D.C. From the studios in Fairfax City. We're very humble and grateful that Peter Ulrich accepted our invitation to a show. Peter, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you.
Peter, the last 2 years have been, very difficult with COVID. I want to know if you were affected, and if you're a touring musician, you couldn't tour, you couldn't do anything, you were stuck at home. And some bands that depended on touring because they're not releasing records, they went out of business, they went back to school, they got another job, whatever. How COVID affected you, how you hold it up?
Right, so I haven't been touring for a long time, sadly, because I love the live work. But for my own solo work, it's just not feasible financially to put a band on the road for that. And so most of my live performances for many years have tended to be just guest appearances with friends, bands, and people I know. So from that point of view, the lockdown didn't affect me. And in actual fact, although I have to be a little bit careful with this because I don't want to make it uncomfortable for people who had bad experiences during COVID, but it actually acted as a catalyst for me to do a number of things, find time for a few things that I probably wouldn't have done otherwise. So
Yeah.
I worked on a new recording project during that time with a singer-songwriter friend of mine, Lisa Tenzin Dolmer, and together with the guy called Zach Ware, who's a guitarist with the Proclaimers, and we did an album during 2021. But the main thing for me was that it gave me the impetus to really sit down and write the memoir that has just been published.
That's right. Good.
Going back through my time with Dead Can Dance and subsequent solo career, etc. Which I'd written a few chapters for probably 10 or 12 years ago, but then it just got shelved and I hadn't had time to get back to it. But with the lockdown in COVID and not being able to go out anywhere and being strapped to my desk and computer, it was the obvious thing to pick up again. And once I got back into that, I got really inspired by going back through everything and researching it all again, and that became my sort of obsessional project for much of the lockdown period. So for me, the lockdown had that productivity to it, and health-wise, I did eventually get COVID, but only after I'd had 2 of the vaccinations, and I have to say that was, that saved me. I had the bad cough for 10 days or whatever, and I mean that was a nasty cough, but that's, I got away with that. So I got off very lightly. So yes, I'm one of the very fortunate ones.
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I so many people die here in the United States, like 1 million, and all over the world. It's very complicated.
Yeah.
Some
And
people believe on it. Some people don't believe in the vaccine. That's completely irrelevant. I just wanted to know if that affected you. For me, as a selfish point of view, right? I'm a computer scientist, so I began working from home. The company say, go home, work from there. And I open one radio, send the link to a friend, they like it, then I open another one. And then as a way to listen to my own music, right? Instead of taking vinyl.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, the musicians are not touring at all. They are at home, they cannot tour, so they must be bored. So I want to start calling people. And it was hard at the beginning, right? Nobody was getting back to me. And eventually Steve Hackett from Genesis gave me a break. I talked to him, we say, yeah, let's do it, man.
Right.
And then now 250 or whatever done, I have done. I'm very shy, so this is, I sort of came out of the shell or something that I'm getting more comfortable. And you, like anything else, you learn by doing, right? You review a mistake, the type of question to ask. You need to review biography, discography of the artists also have been
But
very.
it is a bit difficult because there are, obviously you've had positive things come out of the lockdown period, and so have I. But
Yeah,
the health workers who were under such extreme pressure throughout
yeah.
that period, I think we all owe such a huge debt to all
Oh,
those people
absolutely,
whose
man.
lives just were unimaginable during that time, what they exposed themselves to in order to care for people, and the hours that they were working, etc. It's just incredible. And
Yeah, we are very lucky.
I hope we never forget what they did.
No, absolutely, absolutely no. Here in the United States, they did a lot of ceremonies and where receive award and different hospital give them monetary compensation because
Mm.
they were on the front line. It's very. You and I were at home, right?
Yeah.
Drinking coffee and doing. You were
No,
writing. I was
exactly. Yeah.
writing computer code, but they
No,
were.
that's what I mean. Mm.
Yeah, it's very tough. Let's go back to the beginning. Were you born like in a musical family? I mean, how old were you when you perhaps began taking piano lesson or guitar lesson way before the drums?
Okay, so there were it was a musical family to an extent, but my parents were not musicians themselves. Neither of them played. They loved music and they listened to quite a lot of music. But my father's sister, aunt of mine, who I'm still very close to now, she was a professional singer, and as a child, I used to get taken to shows in the West End of London to see her performing, which used to wow me completely, and I absolutely loved that. And getting taken backstage afterwards to meet some of the members of the cast and that.
Wow.
So that was an exposure that I had at when I was sort of 5, 6, 7, whatever. And on my mother's side of the family, also there were there were a lot of there were pianists and people who played one or two professionals. So there was music around, but it wasn't something that was really to the forefront in my life growing up. So, but it was something that both my parents came from families where they tended to all the kids learned to play or have a go at playing the piano when they were sort of 7, 8, 9, whatever. So yeah, so I got sent off to piano lessons, and I really didn't take to it at all. I struggled with it. I wasn't particularly inspired by what I was being asked to play, and I certainly wasn't a natural at it. But it did give me the concept of scales and notes on a stave and a little bit of the basics of reading music. I mean, I still can't to this day sit down and play reading sheet music, but it gave me the concept of it, which has proved very useful in in a lot of the things I've done since. So it was a good grounding, but it isn't really where I learned and got inspired in music.
Yeah, that's great. Like I mentioned before, I don't play an instrument. I don't know how to read music, but I've been listening to music for the last, I don't know, 40 something year, 3 hours a day, and but I have a wide range of stuff, man. There's music I don't like, of course, but it's a lot of great bands out there. And then eventually, I think your family member went to Acapulco, Mexico, and they brought back
Exactly. Yeah. So
bongo
so
drums.
this yeah. So this was the point that I got really inspired. My grandparents on my mother's side, they after they retired, they'd worked really hard all their lives with a little retail business that they started themselves, and just worked 24/7 on for decades. But when they retired, they were able to sell out the business and had a little pot of money. So they took it upon themselves to start going off on these sort of an annual cruise for 2 or 3 months at a time in different parts of the world. And they had a wonderful time and went on some of the greatest cruise liners of the 60s, and had an amazing time. And they would always bring back a small gift each for each of the grandchildren when they when they went away. So this particular trip, they'd been cruising up the Pacific coast of South America, and came to a stop at Acapulco in Mexico, and found these bongo drums, pairs of small, clay pot, animal skin, very basic bongo drums. And so they bought a pair each for me and my two male cousins, and brought them back. So this was 1968, I think it was. And so I I was presented with this scenario where my grandparents suddenly appeared walking down the front drive of our house with this pair of bongo drums, which were like something from, I mean, you see them everywhere now, but but in 1968 it was really like something from another planet. I'd never seen anything like it, never heard, smelt anything like it. They were incredible, and that really, yeah, I thought I have to learn to play these things. This is great, and that's what kind of started me off.
That's good.
So that also happened just at the time that I was really, we'd got a television, our first television, only a year or two before that. So I was starting to see music programs that were not the same things that my parents listened to on the radio, but things where, with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones and the American band, the Monkees, and this kind of thing on TV, which really started to excite me, and hearing things that made me want to think I'd like to do that as well. So they did, those things sort of coincided, and that's where I became really excited by music, and it's never stopped since.
Good for you. And then when you were the equivalent of high school here in the United States, like 15, 16-year-old, were you part of any bands? Or? No,
by that stage I'd got a drum kit in my bedroom, and being the early 70s, it was a big kit. It had 2 bass drums and all the rack of toms going round, cymbals everywhere, so I could drive the neighbors absolutely round the bend. But I still wasn't, I was playing, and I was developing some techniques and so on, but I still wasn't really that confident. And also a drum kit's a damn difficult thing to transport anywhere, so especially a drum kit that big. So I was a bit slow on the uptake, and where I did get to hear about a couple of local bands forming, there was always somebody else who sort of nipped in and became the drummer before I managed to do anything about it. So I tended to go and see local bands, help them set up and do their own gigs, but I was in the audience rather than up on stage. And then finally, when I was probably, I don't know, about 17 or 18, I did get together with a couple of friends, and we formed a first band, but I think we had 2 or 3 rehearsals in a studio just doing cover versions of songs, and then it just kind of disintegrated because nobody was very interested, and it didn't seem to be going anywhere. So that was it. And then I went off to college after that without really any, still loving music and listening to loads of stuff, but not really playing. And at that point in my life, I was really more interested in journalism and writing. And that's where I thought I was going. I wasn't looking at pursuing a music career at all. So
I got you. And then I think that's when you began playing with the blues soul band Mischief.
Yeah, even that came later on. So I'd gone right through college. There was one attempt during college. A friend of mine decided that we should start a band, and we got a load of people together, and we had one rehearsal. It was an absolute disaster. It was a complete mess of noise and feedback, and we promptly gave up again. And then I left college, got my first job, and it was just by chance I saw an advert in a newsagent's window for a local band that was looking for a drummer. And so I got in touch with them, and yep, they they took me on. They didn't have any other options, so they gave me the drum stool. And yeah, that was a great experience. They were good guys, and we rehearsed twice a week, and yeah, we fairly rapidly became pretty tight, and then we started playing the pub and club circuit, and we were just playing for beer money and for the fun of it, and it was so it was no pressure,
Yeah.
and it was all we weren't writing material. It was all cover versions, soul, a little bit of reggae stuff, some blues stuff, but it was, yeah, we had great fun doing that, and really, if it hadn't been for that, when I had the chance encounter with Brendan and Lisa, I wouldn't have been anywhere near ready to take up that opportunity. So it was a great thing for me that I had that opportunity to play with that band.
Absolutely, man. All right, let's go. We'll go back and forth a little bit between your career, the book, and
Yeah.
so before the COVID, you mentioned that you have kind of the first two chapters done or so, and you got busy with your life, you didn't have the time, and then during the COVID, you said, "Well, I have this project. Maybe I have time now. I'm at home, right? Maybe I should start continue
exactly.
writing the book, right?" And then how
So
long?
yeah, so
Go ahead.
I'd written, I think it was probably about 4 chapters, maybe 10 or 12 years ago,
Yeah.
and I showed it to Brendan and Lisa at the time, and they thought it had something and worth pursuing. And a couple of friends and family members read it and thought it was good. Some people gave me a few comments on it, which was helpful to tighten it up. And some of it I'd put too much waffly stuff in, which wasn't really relevant. But people were good and were honest with me and blunt with me and told me that bit doesn't work and so on. So yeah, I had that, but then it just got set aside, and I got involved in other things, and time just drifted past. And so there was probably, for all that time in between, I did nothing. I never even looked at it, didn't do anything with it at all. And then yeah, it was really the COVID lockdown thing that made me think, this is the moment where I need to go and get that out and start really doing this seriously. And so that was it. Yeah.
I got you.
And then it happened. Then it flowed very quickly after that. Once I really settled down to it, and I could make 3 or 4 hours a day to really work at it. And I mean, some days that would just be purely scouring the internet for to try and find bits of information about particular shows that we'd done or things that happened at various times. And other times it would be actively writing solidly for 3 or 4 hours at a time. But either way, it was really enjoyable to do, and it then it started to motor along and came together.
That's a beautiful. Feel free to elaborate on you were at home and then the phone rang, and then the person introduced himself as Brendan Perry, and he asked you to.
Yeah, so it was. Yeah. It was just an amazing coincidence of timing that I had this job which I loved, where I was a press and publicity officer for a small London fringe theatre called Riverside Studios.
Yep.
It used to put on an amazing range of theatre, music, art, all sorts, and it was a great place to work. It was really vibrant, really buzzing. But because the artistic director who was running the place at the time just had no concept of trying to be frugal with the finances. He just wanted to put on the most elaborate, crazy shows that he could. So he was bringing in theatre companies from Brazil and from Poland and Italy and whatever, and the cost of these things was phenomenal. And so in the end, the place got into financial difficulty, and we couldn't stave it off, and we all got issued with our redundancy notices. And I'd literally just received my redundancy notice and told that my job was ending, when I present it in the book as being sort of within hours of this, that I received this phone call from Brendan. If I'm perfectly honest, I can't remember if it was genuinely that quick or if it was in the next day or two, but it was, nevertheless, it was virtually at the same moment. He phoned me completely out of the blue. I'd never heard of him, never met him before, and just said to me, you know, somebody's given me your number. I understand you're a drummer. We're looking for a drummer. And asked me if I was doing anything. So I said, well, as of this moment, no. So
Wow.
let's go and have an audition. And that's how it happened.
Oh my God, man, that's destiny, I think, man. Huh?
Yeah, it is, because Brendan and Lisa had arrived in London from Australia, but so they'd formed Dead Can Dance a year and a half or so earlier in Australia, and they'd been playing the club scene in Melbourne. But when they came to London, initially just the two of them came. Then they managed to convince their bassist Paul Erickson to also come over. But their original drummer, guy called Simon Munro, who used to play under the name Des Hefner, he decided that he didn't want to make the move. So they were there in London looking for their record deal and wanting to start doing some live shows. So needed to find a new drummer. And
then how did it go? Obviously the audition went well, but because you got the job, but
well, it didn't. It was first of all, I because of the type of music that I've been playing before, where you're basically just timekeeping, you know, you just sit and play the basic 4/4s and so on. What Brendan was looking for in a drummer was very different to what I'd ever played before. It kind of had some reference points in things I'd been listening to, but nothing that I'd ever played before. So when he and Paul first started playing in my audition, I was just sitting there thinking, well, this sounds amazing, but I've no idea what to play to it. But Brendan Brendan himself is a multi-instrumentalist. He's a very talented musician on all sorts of instruments, and he's also a very good percussionist. Yeah. He'd never actually learned to play a sit-down drum kit, but he kind of had an ability to come and sit at the kit, and he knew in his head what he wanted the drum beat to be, what he wanted the pattern to be. Yeah. And he could kind of throw himself into it and just hold it for about 3 or 4 bars, and then he'd lose it because he didn't have the technical accomplishment to keep it going. Yeah. So I had to kind of watch and see what he was doing and very quickly register it in my brain and then try and reproduce that. So that was right at the very beginning. I mean, obviously, once I was accepted into the band and started rehearsing with them on a regular basis, then I kind of got into the flow of it and started to get into the mind process. So I was thinking in the way that he wanted me to see things and approach things, and then it gradually became more natural. But yeah, in the first audition and the first couple of rehearsals, it was we were approaching it with that method, and it was not easy. And I really initially didn't think that he would want me to continue. I thought it would just be too much effort for him, and he'd probably go and try and find another drummer who was a bit more accomplished in the kind of drumming that he was looking for. But thankfully we just got on really well as friends, and he could see that I was really inspired by what they were doing and really motivated to get into it. So thankfully for me, he decided to bear with me and train me up.
Yeah, that's the great. They condensed music well before the kind of, you can see in the first record, but some year later, but it was very unconventional, very weird, right? It wasn't the standard it wasn't pop, it wasn't rock, it was more ethnic and using different instrument. And then, you know, some people, musicians say, no, 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 I don't want to go that path. I want to make money. I want to go the conventional route, stuff that we can play in the radio, tour, make some money, right? Right.
Yeah, I mean, there was never any talk of trying to do anything to make money or to be commercial. It was always what really inspired us in the music, and to make something really original, but something that really moved us. And it wasn't that we didn't care about money and didn't, I mean, at that time we had you know, just a few pence to share between us, and we were really struggling to put food on the table. So it wasn't like we didn't want money, but we were never prepared to do anything deliberately just to be commercial. They always, I think Brendan and Lisa in particular were always convinced that they could make make music that and gather an audience that would bring them the success that they eventually did achieve. They were always convinced that people would warm to that music if they could reach an audience. So that's why they wanted the record deal. They wanted to be able to play the bigger venues. They were convinced that there was an audience for the music they wanted to make, rather than trying to make music for an audience that already existed.
Yeah, it is very, it's unbelievable that they have the conviction, right? When after they leave their own country in Australia and came to London, and well, there's no audience for that kind of stuff, but this is what we want to do. If we become good, people will attend our shows and we will make it. But some bands see the commercial side of things and they give up because you need to pay the bills, right? You need to pay the flat, the rents, right? You need to eat, right? You know, they were very poor, so you can get a job, forget about music, or get a part-time job and part-time music.
Yeah.
And so forth. But
no, that was never an option. It was never I mean, I did some work alongside. Always did some other work alongside the band, but Brendan and Lisa themselves were always totally 100% focused and just completely believed that that's what they were put on this planet to do.
Wow.
And their success would come because they just had 100% belief in the music that they were making, and I got pulled along with that belief. I mean, I was convinced as well that what they were making was fantastic. I loved it, but my tastes have always been a little bit off the wall, never really that mainstream. So I wasn't sure that in the early stages that there were enough people around who would agree, but yeah, fortunately the audiences did come and have just stayed and grown over the years ever since.
Absolutely, man. And I was reading the books that I wasn't aware, but I think in Melbourne in 1981 they did about 10 shows or so. In 82 they did another 10 shows before they arrived into the UK, and I wonder why they ended up leaving. I mean, what was the need of, if that what kind of was, I don't know if I want to call it ethnic music or so at the beginning, it would have been more receptive in Australia for the type of country that is versus in Europe.
Yes,
I wonder why.
As I say, there was really that to that extent it was a commercial decision, because they just couldn't. There weren't the record labels, and also Australia is a relatively small market. I mean, it's the population of Australia has been growing quite steadily in the last few decades, but at that time, you know, still a relatively small. I mean, for such a huge, vast geographical area, it's a relatively small population. So it just wasn't it just wasn't a big enough market. and nearly every band from Australia that made it had to do that through a record label and an outlet, either in the UK or in the States. So you had the option to go to one or the other. And only maybe 6 to 12 months before Brendan and Lisa decided to make the move, they'd seen Nick Cave and the Birthday Party move over to London and get their record deal with 4AD, which had launched them from essentially Nick Cave and the Birthday Party were around the same scene in Melbourne that Brendan and Lisa were on. And they saw that work for them. And Brendan has family roots in London. And at the time, his mother and father, who were still in New Zealand, where they'd originally emigrated to, were deciding to go back to London. So it gave Brendan a base that he could go to when he arrived in London. And he knew London. I mean, he grew up in London until he was 15, so he knew London.
Oh, I see. Yeah, I see.
So it was really sort of a no-brainer that's where he would want to go. So then he had to convince Lisa, and she agreed. So they came to London, and it was probably at that time also for the type of music they were doing, it was more likely that they would get some interest from labels in the UK, such as 4AD or Factory or Mute. Those kind of labels were more likely to be the ones who would perhaps take an interest of music that was being made in that way. And we also had does the John Peel show? Do you know about the John Peel show? Yeah. So we had this radio show, the John Peel show in the UK, which was giving an outlet to a lot of this kind of music, which didn't fit into, the schedules of daytime radio. So in that to that degree, it was a kind of healthy scene to try and come into and see if you could make an impact and get an audience in that area.
And then at the beginning, right? They wanted to get a record deal, but in order to get a record deal, right? I think they end up using you were the drummer, but you were like the person with all the admin skills and strategy, and then they end up recording, right? The demos, the tape at the time, and then was your job to take a look at the phone book, right? The top 20 record in the UK, and then send a copy to each one of them or something, right? Right.
No, it was. I mean, at that time, out of where they were living, they didn't have a phone. So one really practical thing was that I had sorry, I've got sun pouring through the window here. I'm just going to move this around a bit.
Sure.
They didn't even have a telephone in the flat, and obviously this was long before the days of mobile phones and internet and so on. So so just from the practical point of view, I ended up being the one who was getting on the phone to record companies and promoters and people and trying to organize things. And then also I'd had the experience of, I'd been a press and publicity officer in my couple of jobs before I met them. So I was used to doing that kind of work. So, I knew the format for issuing press releases and doing that kind of thing. So, I just sort of kind of slipped into the role of doing that for the band, what I'd been doing before as a professional job. So that also became a useful facet for them to have that added into the armory of the people that were involved. And although it was interesting, I just because before I'd met Brendan and Lisa, they'd made a little demo cassette, and they'd gone around themselves got on push bikes and gone around a few of the independent record labels in London and just sort of walked in and handed in these demo tapes. and nothing had come of that. So when they met me, we remade some, or not remade, we made a new set of demo tapes, and I actually sent them out in the post to the various labels, the same labels, but with a press release and making it just look a bit more kind of professionally done.
Wow. Yeah.
And it was as a result of that that Ivo Watts Russell of 4AD contacted us after he'd received that package. But then when he read the book recently, he told me that that he remembered Brendan and Lisa actually coming to their offices on the bikes and handing him a tape. But obviously he didn't respond to that point. He only responded later when we sent the second tape. So it was probably the combination of the two things that actually grabbed his interest and eventually got him to get back to us.
And that's by the chance you have any copy of the tape, or they are long gone? It's impossible.
Yeah,
someone in a factory somewhere in a basement, they may have that tape. I don't know, a second generation, third generation.
I certainly haven't got a copy of it. I don't know whether Brendan has, or whether any of those, whether even somewhere in the vaults at 4AD that still exists. But I know what tracks were on it, and I've still got a copy of the press release that I issued somewhere. But
really, oh wow, that's beautiful.
But I haven't. Yeah, I haven't got a copy of the tape.
And then, so you send the tapes and the cassette at the time with a nice press release and a good package, and then it was Ivo and 4AD the only one that get back to you, or there were a couple of them,
Yeah, so initially Ivo got in touch with us, and he said, you know, I like the tape, but I just can't offer you anything at the moment because I'm, you know, he had the Cocteau twins at the time. He still had just the back end of Bauhaus, and Wolfgang Press, Colorbox. He had a number of artists on the label. Exmal Deutschland was still with them then, and he just didn't have the capacity to sign anything else at that moment. So he just said to us, you know, leave it with me and I'll come back to you. So we thought, oh, okay, you know, that who knows how long that might take. So we were still continuing to rehearse, to write material, looking at trying to get a few gigs and put ourselves out to other people. And then a few weeks later, he got in touch with us again and said, look, if I put you in as support act to a couple of shows that we've got coming up, will you do that? And it'll give me a chance to have a look at you. So we jumped to that. And so he put us into the support slot on 2 Exmal Deutschland gigs in London. And when we did the first one of those at a venue called the Ace in Brixton, so that would have been, I think, March or April 1983.
83,
yeah. He was blown away by it. He said to us afterwards that it was really just Lisa's voice on the tape that we'd sent him that got him interested, but then actually seeing and hearing, particularly you know, what Brendan was doing with guitar and vocals at the time, and just generally seeing the way we moved the what we created on stage and how we moved around and changed the instruments and the whole dynamic of it, he was really really taken with. So we did that show, and then this another one a couple of weeks later with Exmal, and then he came back to us. He came over to dinner with us, and we put on our best dinner to entertain him and his partner of the time, Debbie, who was running the 4AD label with him. And as a result of that, they came back to us and said, yeah, you know, we'd like to work with you, and we'll give you 2 weeks in the studio to make your first album.
Wow. Yeah, yeah. You knew, I think you mentioned in the book that Brendan was very meticulous and analytical in his study of music and composition, but you knew at the time that the level of, I don't know, of course, I never seen the tape. I have, you know, I have all the condense records, obviously,
Yeah.
vinyl, CD, but you knew at the time would have been easy or difficult to conceive the level of Lisa in her singing skills and, or
Yeah,
when
I
you were
think
in the studio, right? You didn't, when you were rehearsing, right? It's very soft, you know, you don't sing the same way as you were on stage. And eventually, I think you mentioned, well, we did in the first tour, the first show, and then you realize, man, she's unbelievable, right?
no, it is very hard to capture that on recordings, even really high quality recordings. You can never quite get that that incredible intensity and that extra dimension that you get from a live performance. So I say in my you know, in the book that when I did that first gig with them in Brixton, that Ivo had put us onto the bill with XML Deutschland. I mean, obviously by that point I'd heard Lisa sing many times in rehearsal, so I knew she had an amazing voice. But when she first started singing on stage, you know, I mean, I'm sitting at the back of the stage playing drums, and I just thought, wow, that was, you know, I was completely knocked out by what was coming out from her and how it was filling the auditorium. I mean, up to that point, I'd only heard her sing in this little ramshackle community hall that we used to rehearse in. Yeah. And it was obviously she had a great voice, but yeah, but when she started singing and it filled that auditorium. And I say in the book, I remember, because what used to happen in that time was probably still does today. If you're like, we weren't even the second support band, we were the third band on the bill. So at that point in the, you know, you're coming on at sort of 7 o'clock or something, and frankly, half the audience are still in the local pubs down the road, and the ones that are in the venue are just in the bar at the back. So you're playing to you know, probably 20 or 30 people who are actually bothering with the first support band. Yeah. When Lisa started singing and this voice kind of filled the was up to the rafters in this place, suddenly all the doors at the back of the hall started opening, and all these people were pouring in from the bar at the back, because they could hear this voice coming through, and it was obvious that they were thinking, what is that? We've got to go and find out what this incredible sound is. Yeah, that's a memory that really sticks in my mind from all that time ago. Right,
unbelievable. And then I will give you the first break. You say, okay, you have the studio for 2 weeks to, you know, put something together. How did it go with that? It was difficult, hard to do it.
Yeah, it was. It was. I mean, I had a couple of little issues myself, because I'd never been in a recording studio before, and it was a bit daunting and so on. But again, Brendan helped me through. There's a story about that in the book. But yeah, I mean, ultimately we got all the parts recorded satisfactorily in the first few days. But then it was the production side of things that really caused us the problems, because even Brendan didn't have any experience at that stage of that side of things. And yeah, it was incredibly frustrating, because we were getting mixes that sounded fantastic on the monitors in the studio, But when the engineer gave us a tape to take away and play on our, little systems at home and that, it just sounded terrible. It sounded all muddy, and we couldn't work out what was going on. Why these mixes that we had in the studio were sounding great, but then when they were mixed down and we took them away to play them at home, it just sounded a complete muddy mess. So Brendan in particular got completely stressed out with this, and we had a really, really tough time with it. And at the end of the 2 weeks, we had a set of mixes which Brendan was really quite desperate about. So he went to see Ivo, and Ivo listened to them and said, yeah, they, to me they sound okay, but they're nothing on what I've heard you play live. So he agreed to give a little bit more studio time, so we could, in a few weeks later, so we could kind of reflect on it and take, just get over. And Brendan was absolutely exhausted, so he needed to sleep solidly for a little while and just get his mind relaxed again before going back to it. So we had another week in the studio, or really Brendan did, just working on the production and the mixes again, and managed to make some improvements. And then when we went to the mastering studio to have the final thing cut, we were able to get it brightened up a bit again. But it was really, yeah, it's a shame, because I loved the material, the songs that we had on that album. I think there are some great songs on that album, which it doesn't really do justice to. It's not terrible. It's still an album that a lot of people love, and I still love it myself. But if it had been produced with the knowledge that Brendan in particular and experience that he has now, it would have been another thing altogether. But we subsequently recorded a few of the same tracks for a John Peel session, and again with the additional experience, we were able to improve on them, I think, again at that stage. And then even since then, they've been remastered for re-release, those tracks, a couple of times. So if you get one of the more recent remastered mixes, I think again they've been improved and they benefit a little bit. But I mean, if you take a song like Ocean that was on that first album, what Lisa used to do with her voice in live performances is totally compressed on the recordings, and you get a sense of it, but nothing like what it used to be when we played it live. And so people who had heard the recording and then came along to our live shows were completely gobsmacked at the difference.
I wonder if there is any somewhere, you might know, in YouTube or one of these places. Of course, we didn't have cell phones at the time, right? So if people using cassette or tape recorders, if there is any recording of the early stuff, 83, 84ish? I wonder, it didn't look.
There is somewhere on YouTube. There's a recording of, if it's still available, of a sound check that we did in Bedford in the UK in 1984. But then the first one that I'm really aware of is there's a recording of a whole show from it's either, I think it's Bremen or Bochum in Germany in 1986.
Well, 2 years later.
I mean, it's done with a handheld cassette machine in the audience in the gig. It's a bootleg, so the quality's or rather a handheld video recorder. So the quality is not great. I think if you look, Dead Can Dance Bremen 1986, I think it was Bremen. Does that come up?
I will check it out. I will check it out later on when if it's recorded, because.
But so that's really, as far as I'm aware, that's probably the earliest because we weren't making any videos. We didn't do TV, not because we didn't want to, but we simply didn't get invited to do TV. So we didn't do any TV performances. So there's really nothing, no video, no sort of professional video recording of anything that we did live all through the time that I played with Dead Can Dance. The first real kind of concert performance that was recorded was the one that was done for the toward the Within album on the 1993 tour, which was the first one that I didn't do.
That's
so,
right.
So yeah, I missed out on on being a TV star.
Yeah, the beautiful thing also, I really like it about the book, is that you express your shortcomings as well. You know, it's very different to, well, I know how to play drums, freak out a studio, record deal, playing live in front of, I don't know, maybe 300, 400, are worlds apart, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like a kid, you know, you can play football in England in the league number 4, and then eventually you get to the Premier League, and it's another world altogether, right?
No, it's you know, I mean, there's the different elements to it. You've you know, there are millions of people all over the world who sit in their rooms at home and play an instrument, but to actually be able to get up on stage in front of a sizable audience, or to go into a studio and when that red light goes on and perform is a quite different thing, and it needs a different mindset. And certainly when I first performed live with Dead Can Dance, I mean, we turned up for that first gig that I was talking about earlier in Brixton, and I hadn't even realized that we were going to be playing through a PA system. I never even thought about it. I'd never played through a PA system. And of course, Brendan, Lisa and Paul had been used to, you know, they'd done proper gigs using PA systems back in Australia, and never thought that you know, in the gigs that I'd done with my previous band, we never played with I mean, obviously the singer had a PA and the guitarist had an amplifier, but the drums were never, you know, we were playing small pubs and I was just in the corner of a stage. There wasn't room to mic up the kit. So yeah, so my first experience was turning up for the sound check at the Ace in Brixton, and suddenly finding that my drum kit had been put up on a drum riser, so it was higher up above the stage, which I'd never experienced before. And then suddenly there's microphones all over it, coming in over the drums and over the cymbals, which you have to be careful, obviously, not to hit while you're playing.
That's right.
And I'm bathed in floodlights coming out, spotlights coming at me from all directions, and I'd never experienced that at all. So it was something, initially it was absolutely terrifying. And knowing that we've been put into that gig, you know, it wasn't just a sort of low-key thing. We were there on display before Ivo, with our potential record deal hanging in the balance. So it was quite a big pressure thing. Now obviously all the attention's focused on Brendan and Lisa, but even so, I've still got to do my bit. So yeah, I tried to get over a flavor of that in the book, and also a flavor of some of you know, one or two initial small struggles I had in the studio. You know, just because I'd never, those things were completely new to me. I'd never done them before, and I was a competent drummer, but I wasn't a brilliant drummer or a brilliant musician by any stretch of the imagination. So I was already feeling a bit out of my depth, and yeah, there were issues with that. But I thought, you know, why not tell that openly in the book? Because I think I thought it would be interesting to people, and so it has turned out. You know, people have been quite responsive to that.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm very receptive to that kind of stuff because
Yeah, well, I think what would be wonderful if somebody who didn't have the confidence to get out and do it came to me and said, reading about how you dealt with that and cope with that and how you went on to do everything that you did after that gave me the confidence to go out and do it as well. That would be great.
yes,
So,
absolutely. And
so yeah,
and
so
and and
I thought it was
as we
interesting.
say before, sometimes you read books, I don't know, a biography of Peter Gabriel, Genesis, Pink Floyd, whatever, right? That I have books somewhere, but reading for somebody who was there from the kind of beginning, not the beginning of Australia, but the beginning of the UK, and for reading from your point of view, what really happened. That's amazing. That's what makes it special.
Yeah, but
You
but
know.
also, if you go into a bookshop and you look at all the music memoirs lined up on the shelf, then they're generally all big stars. They're people who are,
Yeah.
the main singers, the main guitarists. They're
Yeah.
the big people in the, they've got a big following, big cachet. Whereas for me, I thought the angle for me that is interesting is that I'm just a guy who loves music,
Yeah.
and who had elementary skills in playing an instrument, and just by a chance of fate happened to get this opportunity to play in what would, I'm sure, have become one of my favorite bands of all time. Had I never met them, I would have certainly got to know about them because I was listening to John Peel all the time at that time anyway, and
Yeah.
I'm sure they would have become one of my favorite bands.
Yeah.
But I actually got a chance to join the band and then go
Absolutely. Yeah.
touring around the world and recording with them. So it was really extraordinary, and for me, that's the backbone of my story.
Yeah. Absolutely. You mentioned several times in the book that the Dead Can Dance, at least at the beginning, well, and probably now, the song were written upside down. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, okay. So that was this was really a lot to do with the way Brendan approaches things. Brendan really sort of he analyzes everything and really thinks about the way music works and how everything is constructed, and that's how he comes to a lot of his really really making the compositions quite different and unique. So before I met him, I was used to, write the few songs I'd written myself, or going and working with other people and songs that people would bring along to rehearsals. You always tended to get the situation where somebody would write write a chord sequence on a guitar or write a melody on a keyboard or something, and come along with a basic format for a song, and then the drummer and the bassist would just put their drum and bass line to that. So Brendan had kind of figured out that this always tended to result in a lot of songwriters just falling into their natural habits with the chord sequences or the rhythmic feel that they approach things with. The bassist and the drummer were tending to be very, very passive as creative forces. They would just come along and put standard kind of patterns behind what they've been presented to play to. So the way he liked to approach things was first of all, we would create the drum pattern, not knowing anything about what else was going to be part of that song.
Yeah.
We
Wow.
just create a drum pattern. So that each song would have a totally different feel to it. And then once we'd got a drum pattern working that we liked, then he would start working with Paul on the bass line, but not just putting a bass line that just sat comfortably on top of the drums, but something that worked in and out of the drum pattern and would sometimes veer off and then come back in with the drums and just do different things. So we had quite a lot of rehearsals in the early days when I was first working with him, where we just work on drum and bass patterns and not have any other, nothing, we wouldn't do anything else for the entire rehearsals. We'd just work on a drum part and then how a bass part would work with that. And then he'd make a basic recording of that on a cassette machine, take that away, and then and then when we came back to the next rehearsal, he'd have the format of a song. But it meant that particularly a lot of pretty much the whole of that first album was written in, and the guy of the Arcane Delights EP was written in that way. And that's how we came up with such a kind of diverse set of songs that have these very different feels to them. And we even had a few other songs that we used to play live at shows at that time, which never ever made it onto record. So we probably had, I don't know, maybe 15 or 20 songs altogether that had all been written in that fashion. And yeah, it was a very interesting process, and it's a process that I've absorbed and have used extensively in my own songwriting ever since.
Really? Wow. Yeah. So after the recording, I Will Give You More Time, you went back to the studio, and they were kind of, Brendan and Lisa say, yeah, it's good enough. Let's go with it. It was like a record deal, like a signed document. Okay, you were going to be part of 4AD at the time, or
we hadn't actually signed the contract at that point. We recorded the album, and then I think it was just after we recorded, we went over to because that's right. At that point, Paul, the original bass player, in between, after we finished doing the first set of recordings for the album, but before Brendan went back in the studio to do the remixes, Paul decided to leave. So in my time with the band, I only ever played the 2 gigs with Paul and then recorded the first album with him. And then he was really homesick for Australia. He hadn't settled in London at all. And he just, he was just really unhappy. Which was a shame, because he was an important part of the setup that we had, and he was good to play with. I really enjoyed working with Paul, but yeah, he was desperately unhappy, and so he went back to Australia. So we had to find a new bassist for because by that stage Ivo had lined up for us to go and tour in Netherlands with the Cocteau Twins.
Yeah.
But in between time, we went to 4AD's offices and actually signed the record contract. So the first ever recording contract we had with Dead Can Dance was only signed by Brendan, Lisa, and me, because we were the only at that instant we were the only 3 members.
Yeah. Wow, that might be nice memorabilia to have seen that contract. You have a copy somewhere at home?
I think so. Yeah.
That would be great.
That'll take some mining for, but
yeah, it will be good one day to. I don't care about the money of what I want to see. What the real thing of it. So then you record, you got the deal, you signed the document, and then I would say, well, now we want to play 8 concerts, I think, in 13 days, right? And then
so that again, that was a completely new experience for me. We were suddenly given the opportunity, which was amazing, to go on tour as the support band to the Cocteaus, who had this 8-day tour around Netherlands.
Yeah.
And that was an absolutely fantastic experience. I mean, I knew a little bit about their music, but not that much. But obviously, going on that tour, I got to go out and watch their set every night. So I got 8 free tickets to Cocteau Twins shows. It was absolutely brilliant. So yeah, it was that would to actually be out on the road and playing 8 shows in, I don't know, whatever, 12 days or something was a completely new experience for me. And it was really amazing how just in that short period, how tight the playing became, because we were on stage every night or every other night doing the set. And it really, you know, in such a short time, it becomes second nature. You really settle into it. And that was an interesting experience. But what was also great for us on that tour was that by the Cocteau standards, they were playing quite small venues. So we were playing venues that were maybe 400 people capacity.
Wow.
So they were all sold out long in advance. I don't know why they'd been put into, by their standards, relatively small venues. But what it meant was that the audiences were all, so they could try and get their best positions near the stage or whatever, were all coming in, for our act to stake their places. So we were playing to pretty much packed houses every night as well. And the response was great. You know, we had a fantastic reception, and we, you know, that really set us on our way.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Then, and of course, I know Cocktail Twin very well, and they, you know, with Robin Goodyear and Liz Fraser, they were, well, they're not together anymore, but they were a great band. I never saw, unfortunately, for one reason or another, I know the music. I have a lot of records from them, but they were, I don't know how, probably they were great, you know, seeing them live, but it was very, I mean, it was very good compliment for the two of you, you know, playing one another at the same night, one before the other, and it's very good.
And also for the audiences to go to a show where they first saw us performing with Lisa singing, and then they got to see the Cocktails with Liz singing. I mean, that was quite something.
Yeah, Liz Fraser, she has an unbelievable voice. I mean, yeah, she kind of you know, later on she became, you know, very, very famous with all the other 4AD record, but it's another person who had an unbelievable voice as well.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely.
No, I was in Seventh Heaven because I was, you know, playing as part of Dead Can Dance, and then going out the front and watching the Cocktails every night. It was just, you know, I thought life doesn't get any better than this.
Absolutely. And I have never met Ivo. I think Ivo is here in the United States. I think he moved somewhere to a farm or.
Yeah, he keeps very, very private these days. He went through some difficult times and decided to completely get out of it. So he keeps his head down these days.
Yeah, but you know, the kind of bands that were in the 80s, in Gothic rock, dream pop, like Bauhaus, Cocktail Twin, Modern English, Dead Can Dance, the Pixies, Throwing Music, this Mortal Coil later on. Unbelievable, that type of music. I mean, it's still 80s, now we are a year 2022, 40 years later, they're still so appealing to me, that kind of music, you know.
No, it was a classic period. I mean, that's well documented, and is the opinion of a lot of people. So to have actually been part of that, and Ivo gave me the opportunity to also be involved in some of the things that the other bands were doing. So I did a couple of sessions where I recorded some additional percussion for the Wolfgang Press. I did a bit on one of the tracks for Peter Newton of Zymox, and they did on the album that he did with Michael Brook. I did some rehearsals with Modern English. And it was an amazing time. It was a fantastic experiences, and great to work with all those people.
Yeah, you mentioned the book that kind of Dead Can Dance at the beginning was associated with a Gothic community, if you will, right?
Yeah, so it was, I mean, we never set out to be part of the goth scene, and the Dead Can Dance name, as I explained in the book, the way Brendan explained it to me is just simply that
the music is another way of bringing dead things to life. Or rather, all art forms are basically the bringing of dead things to life. So if you make a painting, then you take pigments and oils and things and mix them together, and you use a brush that's made out of wood and bristle and whatever, and then you put all those elements together and you put that onto the canvas, and you create a picture, and a life force comes out of that picture. And so it is with music. you take instruments that are made out of wood and metal and plastic and whatever, all dead things, and when you use those instruments to create a song and bring a piece of music into being, you create life out of dead things. So the name Dead Can Dance just simply came from bringing life out of dead things, and dance was used as a word that symbolizes life in music. But obviously, once that name came into being, we started getting, the first thing came out in NME, and we were called Bone Shaker Babes, and there was, pictures of dancing skeletons and things. And it wasn't really what we'd ever thought of. I mean, we never used that kind of imagery for the band. Obviously, on that first album cover, which became quite iconic, the mask that was used on the cover of that is again the same principle, that you take a piece of wood, carve a face out of it, and then put it on, wear it as a mask over, and suddenly that takes on a life force.
Mm.
So again, it was that was the concept that Brendan had, and that we were putting out as what Dead Can Dance meant. But it kind of got slightly skewed and came into this this area of death, dancing in graveyards or skeletons and whatever, and kind of made us appeal to the goth community. And then 4AD, again, Ivo never set out to be a label for the goth movement, but obviously by having Bauhaus on the label, that naturally gave it that element. And I wouldn't say that, in fact, I can't really think of another band on 4AD that I would say are obviously an out and out goth band, but it did, it all sort of added to that that sense of it. So so we ended up getting a lot of goths coming along to our shows, but having said that, we were very happy to welcome that audience, and particularly it was certainly the case in the UK, but very much when we went to France.
Oh yeah.
A huge element of the audience were used to turn up in goth uniform. They were a massive, a hugely important part of our audience, and were very receptive, loved the music, and we loved them as a fan base. So so it was never there was never any issue with it. It was absolutely fine, but it wasn't what we set out to. It wasn't something. It wasn't a premeditated thing on our part to go for the goth audience by any means. That's
right. Feel free to something funny to mention. You guys have a couple of experiences in France. I think the first one was the PA system went out, and the people were screaming at you as if you have destroyed, broken the things, and then Brendan went to collect the fee, and like 12 people of karate type.
Yeah, this was one particular show in Marseille, the first tour that we ever did in France, and it was very much on on a shoestring thing. We still didn't have any money at this point. It was also in 1984, and we'd had all sorts of disasters going on. Brendan's dad's van broke down even before we got to the first gig, so we had to abandon his van. He had to go home, and we had to reorganize. The first show had to be cancelled, and other things had gone on, and we'd been having a bad time. And we finally got to this last show in Marseille, and it was a very odd sort of nightclub type of place. And it turned out that the promoter at this show had the band, the Lords of the New Church, were there hanging around. No, they weren't scheduled to play or anything, but they were just happened to be in the area at the time, and he knew them, and they were hanging out at his venue. And they were massive in France at the time. They had Brian James, the guitarist from The Damned, was with them by that stage, and Stiv Bators was a singer, and they were really big in France at the time. So this promoter approached us and said, look, when you've finished your set, would it be okay if Lords of the New Church came on stage and did a couple of numbers for the audience? You know, it would be great. They're prepared to do it. So we said, look, once we've finished our set, you can do what you like. We don't care. But they're not using our equipment, because they had a reputation for smashing guitars up on stage and you know, kicking drum kits around, and we just couldn't afford that. We were still using really cheap equipment, but it was the only thing we could afford. And if anybody smashed our equipment up, that we couldn't do anything else. That was it. We couldn't afford to replace it. So the promoter was really annoyed, because, you know, this was a big thing for him, that he could have the Lords of the New Church do an unannounced you know, sudden special appearance, but they didn't have any gear with them. They were just hanging out in the area, so it couldn't be organized. So that didn't go down well. And then this PA turned up that we'd actually used in a previous show a couple of nights earlier, but in a tiny venue, and it was a really old PA with all like steam valves in it and everything, and it just about cope with the tiny venue. But in this place, we just knew it wasn't going to be sufficient. It didn't have the proper limiters on it to stop the speakers blowing. So we just thought, you know, we told the promoter, we said, we're going to have a problem with this PA. He said, no, it's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. So, okay. So we went ahead, started the show. The place turned out to be really, really packed. There was a good, I don't know how many it held, but I mean, maybe 200 or 300 people in there. But the Lords of the New Church and their little entourage were all sitting on one side, and they were obviously all completely stoned. And we were a few numbers into the set, and they started heckling, and you know, because of Lisa, they started shouting out all this stuff about how's your Barbie, mate, and all this, you know, and Australian accents and ridiculous stuff. And then the promoter had given them all these bottles of champagne to try and keep them in his club and keep them happy. Yeah. And one of their group, I think one of their roadies or whatever, got hold of an empty bottle of champagne and was clearly about to throw it at the stage. And we had this guy our promoter who'd set up the tour, had this friend that he brought with him to help drive us around in the van that they'd hired after our original one blew up. This guy called Walter, who was a lovely guy. He'd been really placid up to that point, you know, very helpful, helping us moving the gear about, etc., driving. And we suddenly saw, I mean, we were up on stage playing, but we suddenly saw him, his body come flying across the table, and just the guy who was about to throw the bottle, he just smacked him straight in the face and knocked him out. And then the whole thing went off. So we're now about 3 numbers into our set, trying to carry on playing. And there's this huge brawl going on with tables and chairs flying through the air, bottles flying through the air. Lisa's Lisa and Brendan have seen it all before in the pubs in Australia that they used to play. You know, it wasn't particularly anything that threw them. So we just carried on playing, hoping that it would all kind of calm down. Yeah. But then the inevitable happened and the PA system blew up. So suddenly, you know, my drums are still coming through, but everything else, all the electronics have all gone. So then the audience thought that we'd stopped playing because they couldn't hear anything anymore. And so turned on us. So we're now thinking, you know, we've had it, we've got to get out of this place. So we started, but obviously we couldn't leave our gear behind. We couldn't just run out of the place. So now we're trying to carry all the equipment and the amps and the drums and everything back through the audience where there's still this wild punch up going on, trying to keep out of trouble. But then the guy who owned the venue, he suddenly magicked up all these bouncers from somewhere who were not trying to sort out the problems that were going on inside the venue, but we found out afterwards that he told them to stop us leaving with our gear because we'd blown up his PA and he wanted compensation for it. So they turned on, and these guys were all trained karate exponents, actually in their black you know, karate outfits.
Really?
So we're trying to carry the gear out and they came at us. And I got kicked over, and I managed in the end I managed to sort of stagger out and pull a few bits of my kit out with me. And I think Lisa and James had got out, but we didn't know where the others were. So it turned out Brendan had been upstairs in a huge argument with the promoter over everything. But our bassist at that time, by that stage, Scott, and also this Walter, the guy who'd punched a guy with the champagne bottle, they'd been pulled off into a side room and given a good beating by these bouncers. So it was just, yeah, I mean, it was just, the whole thing was total chaos. In the end, they were okay, thankfully, and we managed to salvage all our equipment and we got out of there. But yeah, it wasn't one of the most normal Dead Can Dance shows.
Did Brendan end up collecting the fee or not? No.
So we didn't get the fee on that night, but afterwards we did get about half the fee come through. And I'm never quite sure how that happened. It came via our French promoter, and I think it came from the Lords of the New Church Management, because they realized with retrospect that they hadn't really done us any favors with what happened there. But I'm not, to this day, I'm not really sure what happened there, but we did end up getting
that's a funny story. I think it's a good point for you. Please show the book if you don't mind. You have it handy? Yeah, I mean, that's a great book for
Exhibit A. It's obviously this part here is a little extract from the original Dead Can Dance cover,
right?
And the lettering as well. The Dead Can Dance is in the book designer borrowed again from the cover of that first Dead Can Dance album. Yeah. So that's it. It's a very nice hardback book. Some interesting photographs in there, some that people won't have seen before.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's a very well written book, easy to read and funny. I have a lot of good story there, and it's you know where.
Yeah, well, there again. I mean, obviously, it's a serious book about about what happened and our love for music, but funny things did happen. There were funny incidents, so those are included. And yeah, I think a lot of people have this idea that because Dead Can Dance musical performances and a lot of the music on the albums tends to be quite heavy and dramatic and sincere, that we spend all our time sitting around reading Proust and having great philosophical discussions and sitting around being very gloomy. But it wasn't like that at all. We were, you know, if you're, in order to put that much into your music, you need to have your outlets as well. And you know, both Brendan and Lisa have great senses of humor. Lisa actually is one of the funniest storytellers that you'll ever meet. So she regularly used to have us all in hysterics. And yeah, there were funny times. So I try and, you know, get a flavor of that across as well, because it gives the balance of how it really was.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I interviewed Lisa. I have never met her personally.
Right.
An interview with Brendan is coming soon, I hope.
Oh, okay.
And he's a very nice guy. I think Brendan is more kind of introvert, shy, if you will, at least at the beginning. Hard to get to know the guy, right?
He's very, the way they respond in interviews, I would say, is very similar to the way they approach writing their music. It's their natures. So Brendan tends to be much more considered in the way he goes about answering questions and how he structures his answers and so on. Whereas Lisa tends to come very much from the heart, very direct, very responds just the way she feels in the moment. And that was always very much the way they were on stage and in rehearsals and in their approach to writing. You know, they're both very passionate, but Brendan's always he's thinking through every single element, whereas Lisa just likes to be seized by the moment, by the atmosphere of where she is, what she's doing, and just responds in a completely natural and in some ways, you know, almost on an astral plane, or some kind of out of body experience, the way she performs sometimes.
Yeah, I get you.
So they're different in that respect, and I think you know, that comes across quite nicely often in interviews as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you guys went back to London, and then I think it was the time of the album This Mortal Coil, right? And then I think that particular
the first
Son of the Siren became very popular. Is that right?
That's right. That really was the song that launched that whole This Mortal Coil project, and became a massively important spine through really everything that went on in 4AD for many years after that. It created some dramatic highs and lows for people, and also I think some, you know, various points of controversy and awkwardness in the future. But it's an amazing song. It's a very emotional song. And the arrangement that Robin and Liz came up with for it is incredible. Very, you know, very spacious, very moving. But then you know, there's been so many more versions of it by all sorts of different people since then. I think it was Ivo's desire to do it that put that. I mean, obviously, with Tim Buckley's original, it was a well-known song. But I think what Ivo did in bringing it out through This Mortal Coil's version was to really put it on another level altogether.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you know, the implications over the years for what happened with that song were quite extraordinary. And it's a song that Brendan has taken on in recent years and made his own, and not made his own in the sense of taking it away from what it was before, but made a new area of that song for himself, and has given some incredibly moving performances of it. So it's really, it really started a whole chain reaction of things.
I wonder how, from Ivo point of view, from a managerial point of view, how you manage. I mean, there were a lot of great bands, some more successful than others. son, he could have made more money than other promoting, spending more energy and time on this versus that, and how, how, because with a hit like that, right? It's, management will say, well, forget about the other bands. We are not going to record the investment. They are okay, but not that great versus, the Cocktail Twin guys and they have success. Everybody's going crazy about the track. What's your take on that? I mean,
No, Ivo will freely admit that he was completely winging it. He really didn't have he wasn't a business person. He was just a guy who, started this label with no idea where it was going to go. And it was just a vehicle through which he could sign artists that he loved and try and give an outlet to them. So there was no plan to it, and it developed in a very kind of random way, and completely took on its own life force, which had both good and bad implications and outcomes to it. So I mean, to name two perhaps extremes of things that happened with 4AD during that those heady days of the 80s. There was, first of all, the when Ivo was introduced by Peter Murphy of Bauhaus to the Bulgarian Voices, and just through a sort of second or third generation cassette tape, he was really struck with the quality of the voices and the singing and the arrangements, and went and tracked down the guy who'd done the original field recordings, Marcel Celia, who made those recordings back in the mid-70s, and organized with him a deal to be able to release that first album that 4AD did of the Mystère des Voix Bulgares, if that's the right pronunciation, in, I think, 86. And that was huge. That brought those incredible voices to a whole new, much bigger audience. And within months of that coming out, the group was performing at the Royal Festival Hall in London and started touring in Europe. And obviously it's well documented that it had a very profound effect on Lisa and the way she approached her singing. And she ended up all those years later actually performing with them.
That's right, yeah.
So that was a generally totally positive experience, and a lot of good and great stuff came out of that, both for the Bulgarian group themselves and for the listening public and people who are like Lisa, who were influenced by them. And then perhaps at the other extreme of the spectrum, you might think of the Pump Up the Volume single that came out from Mars, which was a collaboration between the guys in Colorbox and the guys in Arcane, who were both on 4AD at the time. And the success of that took everyone completely by surprise. The fact that it went to #1 all over the world and became this massive hit single, and set off a whole chain reaction of legal disputes and injunctions being thrown about, and the 4AD suddenly being swamped with money, which everyone thinks, oh well, surely that's not a problem. But if you're just any kind of small business, and you suddenly get a huge influx of money, that is actually a problem, because just if you know anything about running businesses, managing cash flow and dealing with all the income tax or corporation tax implications and blah blah blah, it creates a problem if it happens so suddenly like that. But also just all the practicalities of trying to keep up with the order flow. I mean, this thing was selling in droves, and the 4AD just used a relatively small manufacturing plant, which was now having to run 24/7 just to purely pressing pump up the volume and nothing else, for weeks on end, just to try and keep up with the demand. It was an extraordinary, it was an extraordinary time. And I think in many respects, it also caused everyone who'd been involved in it to fall out with each other because of the stresses and strains of it all. So I think in the end it became, although it was probably the most successful record that commercially that 4AD ever did, it was probably the one that everyone who was involved wished had never happened, in many respects. So yeah, it was they were crazy times. It was a very small operation. I mean, 4AD operated from one or two little office rooms in this place down in Wandsworth, and it was a small operation. It was all very personal, and it was never really meant to be a major label or anything bigger than just something, a personal project.
Yeah, and 4AD still exists, right? Of course, IVO move on, and the next generation, but as a record label still exists. I don't know how successful they are, but
I think they are successful, and they've had some big artists on the label. They had I don't know whether she's still on there, but they had Grimes on 4AD at one time. I think the National's still on 4AD. Obviously very big internationally. An album that I absolutely loved that came out on 4AD and was Mark Lanigan's Blues Funeral album. And I hadn't even realized that it was on 4AD, and I absolutely adore that album. I thought it was fantastic, and his passing recently was very sad.
Absolutely.
So yes, it's still going, and I think still going fairly strongly. They've got the New Zealand artist Aldous Harding on the label, who I think is.
I need to check it out as well. I buy so much stuff, and I for everywhere. Sometimes I don't even look at the record label. And now when I begin doing the radio podcast and the YouTube podcast, I get, not weekly, but every month I get a box for a different record label. I got 2 boxes the other day, like 40 CDs. And I don't know what I'm going to do with everything, because I have a full-time job, a day job. I teach as well, and the music, and so I need another 3 lives to consume everything, man.
But yeah, so I think 4AD is still quite eclectic, but it's somebody else's vision these days. It's a completely different beast to what it was under IVO.
Yeah, I wrote myself a note to check it out later on. That Condense, it was, well, I'm not saying anything new, but it was a different concept. By that I mean the music was different. The picture on every record was different. The title of every album was different. Long name from songs. It's not the typical, well, I went out with Mary and we fall in love, or there was a lot of thought put into that, Brendan and
yeah, there was, and
so
just the sheer fact of having both Brendan and Lisa as creative forces in that band immediately took it in 2 completely different directions, because Brendan's songs that he sings on and he writes the lyrics for are obviously very, very different in nature to Lisa's songs that have a totally different dynamic and have the wordless language that she sings in. So immediately you got those 2 completely different feels. And then, as we were discussing before, there was Brendan's approach to songwriting, which is looking to make every individual song have a completely different feel basis to it. And then there was the fact that, you know, even when I first met them, they were always looking to do something different with the basic range of instruments we had. Always looking to use instruments in some kind of different way, push boundaries. And we also obviously had Lisa's hammered dulcimer, the Yang Chin, in the mix, which
Correct. Yeah.
gave us that element that other bands typically didn't have at that time. But then as soon as we started to get a little bit of income coming in, and it coincided with the time that you know, music technology was moving forwards, and you were starting to get these keyboards with sampled sounds that enabled you to access the sounds of an orchestra or different instruments that it was beyond our possibility to use, just because we couldn't afford to bring in classical instrument players and or go and, you know, record with an orchestra. It wasn't Brendan in particular was already heavily influenced by orchestral arrangements and was you know, keen on getting into that, but the arrival of this kind of equipment actually gave him the possibility to start writing in parts for trumpets and cellos and trombones and things into his musical arrangements, which it was then practical for us to, when it came to record the Spleen and Ideal album, you know, we were at a stage where, at that point, where it was possible to, as long as the stuff was already written and we knew what the performers' parts were to play, he could bring in a couple of violinists, a cellist, a trombonist, whatever, to perform those parts and immediately expand the range. So so that you know, the difference between the kind of thing, the setup we were working with and the kind of things we were writing on the first album and the EP to Spleen and Ideal, which became the second album, was enormous because of that sea change that had happened with the scope that Brendan had for writing and arranging. And it also gave Lisa the opportunity to expand in the dimensions that she was singing in, because these were now, I mean, Lisa always had a great love of opera, so these kind of more orchestral arrangements rather than drum bass guitar arrangements gave a lot more space for her to develop into with her voice. And so suddenly they were, you know, both writing and developing music in a very different way. And I suddenly found myself playing timpani drums instead of a drum kit, and
that's right, yeah,
things. And we evolved, and so immediately the sound had changed. And then as we progressed, by the time we got on to a couple of albums further down the line, we'd started listening to a lot of early music, so things like the hurdy-gurdy and the shawm type chanters were coming into the mix, and there was you know, with just general exposure to a lot more world music influences and instruments. You know, we were gathering instruments as we went along and exploring different sounds. And it just created this roller coaster of different areas that we could expand into, and it meant that every time we sat down to write another song, it was something different again. It was a different palette, and you know, a different approach. So it was great, but it always had because Brendan and Lisa were always controlling it. It always had those elements to it that were creating a cohesion between all the different periods that we went through, and so it worked. It wasn't like, you know, just a compilation of completely different random things. It had that thread running all the way through it.
Sure.
So it always made it very interesting and constantly in development.
Absolutely. As I was preparing questions for you and preparing the interview in the week, I listened to all the vinyls and CDs and Spotify as well, all the places I go, but I own a lot of the music. And I kind of see the progression over time from album 1, 2, and 3, and at least from the first album. I think some edition include the Dead Can Dance album, but the EP, The Garden of the Arcane Delights.
Yeah, so that was that's right. Initially they were released separately
Separate,
but then later on there was a CD that combined the two. Yeah.
Right. And then there's a particular track that I really like. It's called, then again, it's Dead Can Dance. So the names are different, the names are long. In power we entrust, the love advocated.
Yeah.
It's a long name.
That always made me laugh, because from the point of view that when we after we'd done the first album, Ivo was very keen that we should do a single, so that we could try and have something to go for the singles charts as well as the album charts, because it wasn't just wanting to be commercial, but he just thought that would help to expand our audience and give us more chance of getting something played on the radio stations. But Brendan and Lisa were both a bit not out and out against it, but they just didn't like they just always felt that with a single, it's very much you write a song and it's there for 5 minutes and then it's gone and forgotten about. That's the way singles tended to be marketed, and it gave people to think about them in that way. And they didn't like the idea of writing a song that would just be disposable. So they weren't really into the idea of us doing a single. So the compromise was that we would do this 4-track EP, which would qualify for the singles charts, but we wouldn't name any individual track on the album as the A-side or the lead single. So it would be up to any given DJ to decide if they were going to play a track on the radio, which track they would play. So we came up with the 4 songs, and the one that you just mentioned was not by our design, but it just turned out that way. It was outstandingly, obviously, the most commercial track. So it was immediately obvious, if you listened to the 4 songs, that this would be the one that probably 99% of DJs would pick and play.
Correct. Yeah.
So I've never got him to admit this, but my theory is that Brendan then decided to give it a title that a DJ would find very, very much of a mouthful.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't. So from that point of view, it might make them stop and think about using that track in preference to one of the others. So the song got called "In Power We Entrust, the Love Advocated," which is not the sort of thing you can see popping up at #1 on the hit parade.
That's right.
And I don't know, he would probably deny that was anywhere in his thinking, but I'm not so sure.
I think, and then again, I have not talked to Brenda. I don't know Brenda, but very likely that your assessment is correct, right? So yeah, we are in the business where we need to put a single for the radio. Yeah, we are in a contract to do it. We'll do it, but we are smart, and then we'll make it difficult for a DJ to pronounce and then play that, right? So
if you interview him, you can put him on the spot and ask him.
Oh, I will. I will. Then we go to the second album, obviously, the Spring and Ideal. Yeah. I see that it's very different from a consumer point of view, right? Yeah. Listen, as I say, I listened to all the stuff again this week, and it's very different than the second album. More transition from post-punk to kind of gothic rock and neoclassical dark wave, if you will. And then another track that I really like, We Are Name Again, De Profundis, Out of the Depth of Sorrow. It reminds me a lot of, I don't know if you know a German band called Popelvuh.
Yeah.
They did a lot of work for all the Werner Herzog movies.
No, in fact, Brendan introduced me to them. They were a
I
big
see.
influence on Brendan. He loved their music. Yeah.
Yeah, it's unbelievable, the music. Right?
Mm.
What do you remember? What do you recall about that? In some records, kind of weird. Some record you were participant, right? Because you were doing other stuff for that. And then, although you were not in some album, you were not playing drums, but you were in the band, right? So
Yeah, so really between the first album or the Garden of Delights
Yeah.
EP and the Spleen and Ideal album,
yeah,
the whole nature of the way Dead Can Dance operated changed, and it was really to do with the coming in of the new instruments that gave Brendan the possibility to start doing these orchestral compositions. So he was now, whereas we'd previously been writing all the songs in rehearsal, albeit that Brendan was really directing most of the music and pretty much setting what he wanted from the drum parts and the bass parts that me and the bassist were playing. By now he was really working much more on his own, just at home with equipment, with keyboards that had the sounds in, with drum machines, and he was he was writing much more on his own. So he would come to me and say, I've written this drum part on the drum machine, can you play this? And I would take it away to my place, and I'm trying to work out all this syncopation, make my limbs do things that they never dreamed of doing to reproduce these complicated things that he'd created on a drum machine, which was tremendously good practice for me and developed my drumming abilities leaps and bounds. But it meant that we weren't working together on things as a band in the writing stages. So it didn't really change things that much, because he and Lisa always wrote 99% of everything anyway, but it just really changed the way that we were working on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
He was creating these things with a very different feel to them, and now starting to bring in, some of the pieces still had a drum pattern to them that would be played on a conventional drum kit, whereas others didn't feature a drum kit at all. They would have timpani drums or even just very spacious incidental percussion, or no percussion at all. And some tracks had bass guitar and some didn't, but there was a lot of classical instrumentation being brought in, and a classical approach to instrumentation. He was also very influenced by, as Popol Vuh that you mentioned, was certainly an influence, but he was also, sorry, I've got a tickle in the throat. Not used to talking for this long.
No, that's right.
Yeah, he was also very influenced by film composers like Nino Rota,
Yeah,
and John Barry.
Yeah,
that kind of thing, with big orchestral arrangements. So he was going very much down that route, and writing incredible stuff that I was going around and hearing and thought, wow, yes, it's amazing. So when we came to record that, we initially took all my drums up to the studio in the Midlands where we were booked in to record. But Brendan took me aside and said to me, look, I've written most of this stuff with drum machines. We're going to waste a lot of time trying to set up all the drums and everything and do it. How do you feel about me recording it with the machines? And I said, yeah, whatever, it's not an issue for me. I don't want to see you go through what you went through with the previous album, so give yourself as much time as possible for the production side of things, and crack on, do it how you want to do it. So so yeah, it was kind of strange. It wasn't something that premeditated, but we ended up. So I was there for the first part of the recording sessions, but didn't actually participate in the recording for that album at all. But then, of course, when we went out to perform it live, Brendan never wanted to use machines and any further or any sound electronic sounds any further than he really had to on stage. He always wanted it to be as live and dynamic as possible. So so I was then learning and playing the parts, and we were touring with not only the drum kit but also a percussion kit and the timps and everything. So it became suddenly a huge logistics exercise to to take anything out on tour. And we had the first tour we did after the Spleen and Ideal album. We had, I think, 2 cellists, a 3-piece brass section, and the band. So we were suddenly a mini orchestra on tour. So yeah, it was a very dramatic change. But it was never, for me personally, it was never an issue, because I was still involved. I loved being involved. I loved the music that they were making, and I was just happy to have any part in it. So I still love doing the live work. And but yeah, curiously, when the album came out, I was almost listening to it like a fan who was hearing it for the first time.
Yeah. And you mentioned logistics is so difficult to put a tour together. I mean, even never mind a U2 tour or the Genesis tour, right? But something like 10 gigs in, I don't know, 15 or 10 different cities on 3 different countries. It's very difficult to arrangement, and then set up dates, and then move the equipment, and then rent a van. You don't have roadies all the time. You guys do everything, find a hotel, and maybe the hotel is booked, and you need to sleep in a crampy place. And I mean, I take for granted, I go to see a show tonight or tomorrow, I pay whatever X number of dollars, I drink a cup of beer, I go home, I go to work. I have no idea how the equipment got there, if there was a sound check, if the band had an argument on the way there, if or
of course,
or if they have a bad night's sleep, or they're running low on funds to go to an next gig. No idea. I pay a fee and I enjoy it. So for your part, it's very difficult to, right?
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is a huge logistical exercise. Even for relatively small tours and bands.
Yeah.
There are, as you say, all those elements to it. And even though you may only be on stage for an hour and a half, 2 hours for a performance, when you're actually out on tour, it just consumes your whole time. So during the days when I was touring with the band, I've got lists of towns and cities across Europe and the States and that I've been to, but it's almost like I haven't been to them, because I can't remember anything about them. All I ever saw was the inside of buses, the inside of venues, because Dead Can Dance sound checks used to last for hours. We used to, Brendan was always completely fanatical about about getting the sound as good as possible. So we were always, we could be at a venue at 10 or 11 o'clock in the morning and be sound checking all the way through until the doors open at 7 o'clock in the evening, just working on getting everything. He's absolutely fanatical, Brendan, about making the sound of everything he does as best as it can possibly be. And I think that's something that audiences really appreciate. I think Dead Can Dance audiences really respond to the lengths that have been gone to try and make that sound that then envelops them and gives them that really passionate response. but it's hard work and it's bloody exhausting. You know, you really, we never used to do, but you know, we never used to do like when you hear of the heavy metal bands who are out on tour for 2 years at a time and play, you know, so many 100 gigs in that time. We never did anything like that. We only ever went out for 2 or 3 months at a time, and you know, maybe did 15 shows or whatever. And they've been doing slightly longer tours in more recent years, but but even then we would come back from those tours absolutely exhausted, because we'd just to put that number of shows on, we'd been flat out the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, you know, if you are just recently getting married or forming a family or living with someone or whatever the situation, having kids, and it's very difficult to disappear for your companion, lover, friend, wife,
Yeah, well,
3 months at a time, you know, even never
No,
mind during a year, you know. So.
Yeah, I mean, as you know from the book, that's exactly what happened to me. I mean, I got to the stage where in the early 90s, we had our my wife and I had our second daughter on the way, and my wife was you know, had a very demanding job in teaching, which was really the mainstay of our income as a family. So that had to come first, and yeah, it just got to the point where I couldn't say to her, you know, I'm going off and leaving you with 2 kids and your job to do for 3 months while I go swanning around playing a few gigs. So so at that point I had to say to Brendan and Lisa, look, I'm really sorry, but I can't do it anymore. And yeah, they were fine about it, and I don't think it had any detrimental, well, I know it didn't have any any negative effect on anything that came after. I mean, they were, if they hadn't already been by that stage, they were completely writing everything by themselves, and really there was nothing. I mean, I was a part of what they were doing because we were good friends and had worked together for many years, and I was in you know, in the setup on that basis, but really in terms of just playing parts, they could you know, it wasn't difficult for them to replace what I'd been the parts that I'd been doing. So yeah, so I didn't really create any hiccups for the band going forwards. But then what I call in my book, this section of the book that I describe as the parallel adventures began, because then I obviously was still, you know, a huge fan of Dead Can Dance and wanted to continue following everything that they were doing and going to shows whenever I could, and having any little involvement that I could do. But at the same time, again, it turned out that Brendan created the opportunity for me to make my first solo album and set me off on that path. So I ended up having ever since I've had my own kind of music career that I've been able to work around my family life and other work commitments and so on going on in my world, and they've been on a different stratosphere doing what they do. And it made again a kind of probably something that's a little bit different in a music memoir, that I was able to follow those 2 different paths on very different levels. And in my world, there were a lot of the struggles of being effectively a new artist again, and trying to make my headway in difficult commercial environment and achieve sales, and the problems of not being able to do as much anywhere near as much live work as I would have done over the years, just simply for cost reasons and practical reasons. But also enjoying the huge success that they continued to have, which was brilliant.
Plus, you needed to, be a family man and help your wife and your kids. That's important things as well. So it's, of course, something you need to pay the bills. So, what do you think? You think it's good to take a break and then we continue? We've been talking for 2 hours and continue.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly that time goes.
Yeah, we kind of know that. So I'm very grateful that we can make it part 2 or part 3, whatever. And then we need to talk about your your life after, you know, all the records that I
I'll
have,
be
and I
very
know
happy
your
to.
stuff, the work that you have done, and you know the influence that Lisa and then Brendan
Very
had
much.
on you, because those
Yeah,
those
huge.
3 years give you a lot of confidence to now, hey, I can put
Absolutely.
a record on my own. I know some of the record label. I will call Johnny at that, or Peter, Mary at that record label. Hey, I'm willing to finance, and then coming to the United States, and so it's a lot to cover. And
Yeah.
if you don't mind, I wanna share something here some pictures that I took from the album so people see it. Um, do you see that?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
that's the cover, and
Well, that's the cover and the little flap that goes inside the front of the book, because it's a hardback book, so it's got a paper cover that
correct.
holds
And
on.
I will show like 5 pictures, and of course has a with forward for Lisa.
Yeah.
Let me see, right there, right?
That's
Very
it.
well written what she wrote there. So
Yeah, it's lovely. It's not the sort of standard forward that you tend to get in books. It's very, very Lisa.
yeah,
And yeah, I really appreciated her contributing that to it. It's lovely.
yeah. And I think I have 3 pictures to show, and then we're done. I think that's the one that I took from the book, of course, obviously.
Yeah, so this is very early. This is early
Yeah.
1983, one of our earliest rehearsals before we would have been before we did the first gig with Ivo put us into, and so obviously before we did got into the recording studio, and that's obviously Lisa on the left. That's our original bassist, Paul,
Yeah. Cool.
just in
Yeah.
the background behind her, me on the drums, and a very lean and hungry Brendan on guitar.
Yeah. Yeah, he was very skinny there. Do you remember, if you close your eyes for a minute, do you remember that day or that week or?
Not specifically.
No,
I mean,
no.
we had many rehearsals that were
Like
like
that,
that.
right? So
So
that's one of many, right?
I can remember that era of the rehearsals. It was a very strange. I mean, the hall that we're in there. It was on. I think a lot of people who know about the early days know that where we lived at the time was this council, local authority housing estate, very run down in the East End of London. They were classified as difficult to let flats. You know, it was very. It was where people with very little money lived, and it was you know quite a rough area. And this community hall was kind of sat in the middle between the tower blocks that Brendan and Lisa and Paul lived in, and where me and Nikki lived. And it was just a rectangular box built in the 1960s, just prefabs. And it had this, you can just see in the top there, it's got this wood ceiling with these very bright neon lights, strip lights set into it. But then really bizarrely, somebody had come behind Brendan. You can see somebody had built this, which wasn't a part of the original building. Somebody decided it would be a good idea to build this kind of country style brick and wood fireplace.
Correct. Yeah.
Which I don't think could be used. I can't imagine. I think it would have breached all sorts of fire and health and safety regulations. But it was just there, and it was completely incongruous. It was totally out of character with this 1960s bland rectangular hall. And it had all these, because as I say, it was quite a tough area. It had all these metal grills on the windows, these anti-vandal grills on the outside of the windows. So when Paul had his bass guitar cranked up and was hitting those notes that really get you in the diaphragm, then all these windows were buzzing away in the background as well. And we used to have that in the background of some of our demo recordings that we probably sent to 4AD. It probably got the buzzing window grills in the background.
That's right.
So it was really, yeah, it was and you can see behind me as well, there's some upturned tables which they used to use, pull out and use when the hall was in use for the bingo night, which they had a couple of nights a week. So it was they were funny days, you know. They were real mix of emotions. But this but this incredible music came out of this, you know, this environment.
Oh, absolutely.
In every way,
Brendan
wholly against it.
Brendan looked very, very skinny guy, right? Yeah. He was.
Yeah, he was. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
We didn't know where our next meal was coming in from in those days.
Wow.
It wasn't so bad for me because Nikki was earning a bit of money, and we weren't quite so bad. But Brendan, Lisa, and Paul were all living on just on government handout money, and it was a hard life.
Yeah. I want to show another. That's another picture as well.
Yeah,
Same
so
place,
that
but
was
different
taken
angles, right?
during the same rehearsal. So it's the same place. You can see the beautiful fireplace from a different angle.
And the last one, this is a beautiful place then.
Yeah, so this is that was the thing. This is actually in the same. This is in Brendan and Lisa's flat, which was in this same housing estate.
Yeah.
Well, this was the thing about it. The actual view from the windows of these flats was straight onto the River Thames and over the London skyline. So the views from the flats were really spectacular. And to some extent that's what made it living in that location, you know, gave it some pleasant aspect to it, and also was to some extent quite inspirational as well, having that space and the water to look out over. I think that helped a lot in our you know, our psyche all the time, and helped it not to be too depressing.
Absolutely. Let me stop sharing now, and then feel free to mention the book again, Peter, where people can buy it, and I know this in Amazon, but there are many places all over the world that you can buy it.
Yeah, thankfully, my publishers, Red Hen Press, who are in Pasadena, California.
Yeah,
they're a really great little publishing company that I thoroughly recommend people to check out. They publish, I think it's about 25 or so books a year. And they've been brilliant with the book. The reason why I put it with them was because the two people who run the company, Kate and Mark, they set the press up in the early 90s. I think 1994 it was launched, and they were huge fans of all the 4AD artists, so including Dead Can Die. And when I approached them initially, they were really excited about the book, and just gave me the response, you know, made me feel like, you know, I really want to work with these people.
Yep.
And then as a company, their staff have really taken it on board and been really excited and enthusiastic about it. They're obviously involved in designing the cover, which I'm very happy with.
Yeah, absolutely.
And distribution-wise, in between the time that I signed up with them and the time that the book was published, they changed their distribution arrangements and got in contract with a company an operation called Ingram, which is one of the biggest fulfillment companies in the world for the publishing industry. So consequently, the distribution that they've got on this book now is absolutely fantastic. And if I Google the title of the book, it comes up on sale in places in Denmark, in Hungary, in Taiwan, Japan, Australia, Brazil, probably in your country as well, or your country of origin. It's amazing. It's incredible. So that is both online retailers and bricks and mortar stores. So I think generally the answer is you should be able to, if anybody would like to buy it, thank you very much. You shouldn't have any trouble getting it. You should be able to find it in stock or order it through your local bookseller or music seller, or you should find it easily online.
Absolutely. It was very pleased the people that are going to be listening this interview, the radio, YouTube channel, the Facebook, and Lisa Gerrard fans, Peter Ulrich fans, Brendan, and we mentioned Cocktail Twee many times here as well. Wherever listen, get the book. It's a great book, easy read with a lot of pictures, with a lot of funny anecdotes as well. And it was very nice talking to you, Peter. I will send you a link.
Thank
We'll
you
make
very
arrangement.
much.
And before I forget, what I'm going to do, I want to raffle. We'll do like a real raffle, and we'll get
Oh,
a
yeah.
couple, 2 or 3 books from you. We'll get it autographed by you, and then we'll send it to some of the people from Facebook or YouTube channel.
Yeah, sure, we can do that. Yeah.
Yeah, we can
absolutely.
arrange it. We'll work out the detail. It was very nice talking to you, Peter. Good luck with
Okay.
everything, man. And it was very
Great,
nice.
thank you. I look forward to part 2.
Of course, we'll do part 2 and 3 now. Now United States watches, so we need to watch some FIFA World Cup soccer, man.
Yeah,
Are you what fan of are you? Who Brendan like Arsenal, right? Or no? You
Oh, in the domestic league here, yeah.
domestic
Brendan, Brendan's Arsenal. I'm a fanatical supporter of a team called Norwich City, who
Yeah.
are the we're famous for being the old, what they call here, the ultimate yo-yo side, because we're never quite good enough to stay in the Premier League, but we're often a bit too good for the Championship. So we just go back, up and down, backwards and forwards between the two leagues.
I like, of course, Manchester City because a guy from my country used to be the coach, Manuel Pellegrini, like 5 years ago. He was an unbelievable coach. And in Arsenal, Alexis Sanchez played with Arsenal like 3 years, like 5 years, 6 years ago. He was an unbelievable striker. So
yeah, terrific.
it was very nice talking to you, and have a great
And
afternoon there, Peter. Appreciate it. Thank you.